One family, zero military power. It's total control of Europe's most powerful institution, the Catholic Church. The Medici didn't conquer Florence with armies. They bought it with loans. They didn't seize the papacy through force. They purchased it with strategic debt. And they didn't just finance the Renaissance. They invented the financial mechanisms that made it possible, while simultaneously committing the very sin the Church condemned most: usury. Here's the number that reveals everything. By 1434, the Medici Bank controlled 33 branch offices across Europe, managed assets exceeding 180,000 gold florins, and held debt obligations from the Pope himself worth over 51,000 florins. A single family of Florentine wool merchants had become the primary creditor to God's representative on earth. They financed crusades, funded cardinals, and bankrolled papal elections. When the Church needed money, it didn't pray. It borrowed from the Medici. But the central contradiction is what makes this story extraordinary. The Catholic Church explicitly forbade usury, the charging of interest on loans, as a mortal sin punishable by eternal damnation. Yet the Medici built their empire on exactly that practice. They developed sophisticated techniques to disguise interest as exchange rate fees, service charges, and partnership profits. They became the Church's bankers while violating the Church's most fundamental economic doctrine. And the Church, desperate for their capital, looked the other way. This is how they did it. How Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici transformed a modest banking operation into Europe's financial superpower between 1397 and 1429. How his son, Cosimo, consolidated political control of Florence without holding a single official title. How Lorenzo the Magnificent turned banking profits into artistic patronage that defined the Renaissance. And how the family's financial innovations, double-entry bookkeeping, bills of exchange, the holding company structure, became the foundation of modern capitalism. We're going to trace the exact mechanisms they used to disguise usury as a legitimate business, the precise methods they employed to control Florence's politics while maintaining Republican facades, the strategic marriages and PayPal bribes that put 3 Medici on the throne of St. Peter, and most importantly, the moral gymnastics required to reconcile Christian piety with financial exploitation. The Medici proved something essential about power. You don't need swords when you control the money. You don't need titles when you control the debt. And you do need armies when you can buy the very institution that claims spiritual authority over kings. They built the invisible architecture of Renaissance Europe, and we still live inside the financial system they created. One family of Florentine wool merchants transformed 10,000 gold florins into control of the papacy, domination of a republic, and cultural immortality. They achieved this without armies by mastering the fundamental truth about power. Whoever controls credit controls reality. The Medici didn't conquer Florence. They made Florence economically dependent on their survival. They didn't seize the Church. They made the Church financially incapable of functioning without them. The central paradox defines them completely. Devout Catholics who built their fortune on the sin their faith condemned most. They attended Mass daily while charging disguised interest. They funded monasteries with profits from financial manipulation. They became popes while operating banking mechanisms the Church explicitly forbade. They reconciled this through casuistry and institutional necessity, proving that sufficient wealth buys theological forgiveness along with everything else. The pattern they revealed is the architecture of modern financial capitalism. Create dependency through credit, disguise extraction through complex mechanisms, convert financial power into political influence, use political influence to protect financial position, spend strategically on reputation to legitimize the entire system. This cycle still governs how power actually works beneath democratic and market rhetoric. Their legacy isn't their banking empire, which collapsed into bankruptcy and scandal. Their legacy is the invention of modern financial infrastructure. Bills of exchange became wire transfers. Disguised interest became fee structures. Partnership investments became private equity. Holding companies became corporate subsidiaries, and PayPal banking became central banking. Every innovation that destroyed them became standard practice afterward. The warning is equally clear. The Medici proved that financial empires built on leveraged reputation and unsustainable spending eventually collapse, regardless of cultural achievement or political connections. Lorenzo created the Renaissance while bankrupting the family bank. Modern finance repeatedly makes identical mistakes, over-leveraging, concentrating risk, prioritizing short-term reputation over long-term sustainability, believing cultural legitimacy substitutes for mathematical solvency. The moral questions persist, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. The Medici financed beauty that still moves us: Botticelli, Michelangelo, Brunelleschi's dome. They funded scholarship that recovered classical learning. They supported artists who defined Western culture, but they did so with profits from financial extraction that made others poorer. Does the beauty justify the exploitation? Does the cultural legacy excuse the economic predation? We still don't know. The choice facing modern society mirrors Florence's dilemma in 1434. Accept financial power concentration in institutions that claim to serve public interests while serving themselves, or restructure systems to genuinely align private profit with public benefit. The Medici proved the former is easier, more profitable, and ultimately unstable. We're still choosing the easier path. The final Medici truth is this: they built an empire on disguised theft, converted stolen wealth into cultural glory, used glory to buy political power, and leveraged power to purchase spiritual authority. They proved that money defeats everything, including God's supposed representatives on earth. Their bank died, but the system they created became the invisible operating system of modern capitalism. We're all living in the Medici financial architecture now. We just pretend we built it ourselves. Florence, 1397. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici is 37 years old and nobody important. His family is minor nobility, small-time wool traders who've been in Florence for generations without distinction. They're not Bicci, the dominant oligarchic family. They're not Strozzi, the wealthy merchant princes. They're middling bourgeoisie in a city where status determines everything. But Giovanni has one asset: 8 years of experience managing the Rome branch of a bank owned by his distant cousin. He's learned the PayPal finance system from the inside. He understands that the Catholic Church is the largest economic institution in Europe, collecting tithes from every Christian nation, managing vast land holdings, and constantly needing liquid capital for wars, buildings, and bureaucracy. More importantly, he's identified the central problem. The Church cut unopenly borrow at interest without violating its own doctrine. In 1397, Giovanni makes his move. He splits from his cousin's bank and establishes the Medici Bank with 10,000 gold florins in capital. Half his own money and half from partner investors. This isn't revolutionary yet. Dozens of Florentine banks exist. What makes Giovanni different is his target market and his solution to the usury problem. Traditional banking in 1397 works like this. Merchants deposit money, banks lend it out at 15 to 20% annual interest, and depositors receive a share of profits. This is explicitly usury when lending to the Church. The Church condemns it. Canon law forbids it. Priests threaten damnation for it. Giovanni's innovation is the partnership structure disguised as currency exchange. Here's how it actually worked. The Medici Bank establishes branch offices in cities across Europe: Rome, Venice, Geneva, Bruges, London. Each branch is technically a separate partnership with local managers. When the PayPal court in Rome needs 10,000 florins, the Rome branch doesn't give them a loan. Instead, it sells them a bill of exchange. The mechanism is genius. The Pope's treasurer deposits 10,000 florins in Rome. The Medici Rome branch issues a letter guaranteeing payment of 10,500 florins at the Medici Florence branch in 90 days. The extra 500 florins aren't interest. They're exchange rate fees, administrative costs, and partnership profits. The church gets immediate cash. The Medici get 5% return in 3 months, equivalent to 20% annually. But on paper, no interest was charged. No usury was committed. Giovanni's first major transaction demonstrates the system perfectly. In 1402, Pope Boniface IX needs 8,000 florins immediately to pay mercenaries fighting in the Papal States. Giovanni's Rome branch provides the cash, taking a bill of exchange payable in florins at 8,400 florins in 60 days. The 400 florin profit is recorded as cambia, exchange difference, not usury. The Pope gets his army paid. Giovanni gets 5% in 2 months. Everyone pretends no sin occurred. But Giovanni isn't just avoiding usury laws. He's building structural dependency. Every transaction creates paperwork linking the Medici to Papal finance. Every successful deal makes the next one easier to arrange. By 1410, the Medici Bank is handling over 30% of Papal revenue transfers across Europe. Giovanni has made himself indispensable without the church ever acknowledging they're paying interest. The Rome branch becomes the crown jewel. Between 1410 and 1420, it generates over 50,000 florins in profits, more than double the original capitalization of the entire bank. The mechanism is simple. The Papal court constantly needs cash in Rome, but collects revenue from tithes in France, England, Germany, and Spain. The Medici transfer money from collection points to Rome, charging 3 to 7% on every transaction. They're essentially operating as the Pope's treasury, earning fees on every florin that moves through Christendom. Giovanni also pioneers the holding company structure. The Medici Bank in Florence is the parent company. Each branch is a separate legal partnership, limiting liability. If the London branch fails, creditors can't seize assets from the Florence headquarters. This is corporate structure 400 years before corporations formally exist. It allows aggressive lending without catastrophic risk. By 1420, Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici has transformed 10,000 florins into a network worth over 80,000 florins. He's financing the Pope, lending to merchants across Europe, and operating branches in 8 cities. He's done this without armies, without political office, and without technically violating church law. He's built power through financial architecture rather than force. His success teaches him something crucial. Money creates obligation faster than loyalty. A merchant who owes you money needs you to survive. A pope who depends on your transfers can't condemn you. A city whose economy runs on your credit cannot afford your failure. Giovanni is building a web of dependency that makes the Medici impossible to exclude. In 1421, Giovanni semi-retires, turning daily operations over to his sons Cosimo and Lorenzo. He's 61 years old and has accomplished the foundation. He's made the Medici Bank indispensable to the Papal financial system. He's created mechanisms to profit from the church while avoiding theological condemnation. And he's positioned his sons to transform financial power into political dominance. He dies in 1429, leaving an estate worth 180,000 florins and a banking network that controls Papal finance. His sons will use that foundation to buy a city. The year is 1425, and the Medici Bank operates the most sophisticated financial system in Europe. Understanding how they actually made money requires dismantling their genius at disguising usury. The Catholic Church's position is absolute. Charging interest on loans is a mortal sin. Deuteronomy 23:19 forbids it. Jesus expelled moneylenders from the temple. Canon law threatens excommunication. Yet the Medici generates 20 to 30% annual returns on PayPal transactions. Here's the step-by-step breakdown of their primary mechanism, the bill of exchange. A German bishop collects 5,000 florins in tithes in Frankfurt. He needs that money in Rome to pay the PayPal curia. Traditional money transfer means physically shipping gold across the Alps, risking robbery, paying armed guards and waiting months. The Medici offered an alternative. The German bishop deposits 5,000 florins with the Medici Frankfurt branch. He receives a letter of exchange guaranteeing 5,150 florins payable at the Medici Rome branch in 120 days. No interest is mentioned. The 150 florin difference is documented as exchange rate variation between German and Italian currencies. But here's the trick. The Medici control both the Frankfurt and Rome branches. They set their own exchange rates. The variation is whatever they want it to be. When the bishop's representative presents the letter in Rome, 120 days later, the Medici Rome branch pays 5,150 florins. The 150 florin profit represents a 3% return over 4 months, equivalent to 9% annually. Multiply this across hundreds of transactions monthly, and the profits are staggering. Between 1420 and 1435, the Medici process over 3 million florins through bills of exchange, earning average spreads of 4 to 6%. But the genius extends beyond simple exchange fees. The Medici pioneer the re-exchange system, essentially compound interest disguised as currency trading. Here, as how it worked. The Rome branch issues a bill of exchange to the Florence headquarters for 10,000 florins, payable in 90 days at 10,400 florins. When the 90 days expire, instead of paying cash, the Florence branch issues a return bill of exchange back to Rome for 10,400 florins, payable in another 90 days at 10,816 florins. The debt rolls over, accumulating 4% every 3 months. Over 1 year, this generates 16% return, all documented as legitimate exchange rate differences. The Medici also perfect the partnership profit model. Each branch operates as a separate partnership between the Medici family and local managers. Profits are split 60 to 40 or 70 to 30, with the Medici taking the majority. When a branch lends money disguised as a partnership investment, profits aren't interest, they're legitimate business returns. A wool merchant in Bruges needs 2,000 florins. The Medici Bruges branch doesn't lend him money. They become his business partner, investing 2,000 florins for a 30% share of profits. If he makes 1,000 florins profit annually, the Medici receive 300 florins, a 15% return. No loan, no interest, no usury. This partnership model generates massive profits while maintaining theological deniability. Between 1420 and 1450, the Medici Bank records over 280,000 florins in partnership profits from ventures across Europe: wool trading in England, silk production in Florence, alum mining in Papal territories, textile manufacturing in Bruges. Every florin is legitimate business profit, not condemned usury. The human cost is invisible but real. The Medici charge effective interest rates of 12 to 20% on transactions disguised as exchange fees and partnership profits. Merchants who can't pay face bankruptcy. Towns that default on Medici loans lose access to credit, strangling economic activity. The church, desperate for Medici transfers, overlooks abuses, including foreclosures on church property when secular borrowers default. But the Medici have also created genuine innovation. Double-entry bookkeeping, which they didn't invent but perfected, allows precise tracking of every transaction across all branches. The Libro Segreta, secret ledger, maintained in Florence records actual profits and obligations, while public ledgers show only sanitized versions. This accounting precision makes the Medici Bank the most efficiently managed financial institution in Europe. The dependency network expands systematically. By 1430, the Medici are the primary bankers for the Papal Curia, managing over 60% of revenue transfers. The King of France, financing military campaigns. English wool merchants, providing trade credit. Flemish textile producers, funding operations. In dozens of Italian city-states arranging diplomatic payments. This creates network effects that compound their power. A French merchant doing business with the Papal court needs Medici letters of exchange. An English wool trader selling to Florence needs Medici credit guarantees. A German prince paying indulgences to Rome uses Medici transfers. The bank has inserted itself into the essential financial infrastructure of European commerce. The moral compromise is total. Cosimo de' Medici, now managing daily operations after his father's death in 1429, is a devout Catholic who attends Mass daily, funds monastery construction, and endows charitable institutions. He also personally profits from financial mechanisms explicitly condemned by the church he serves. He reconciles this through theological casuistry. He's not lending at interest, he's providing necessary financial services. The profits aren't usury, they're legitimate compensation for risk and expertise. The church accepts this fiction because it has no alternative. Without the Medici's pan-European network, PayPal revenue collection collapses. Without their bills of exchange, crusades can't be financed. Without their credit, the PayPal states can't maintain armies. The Medici have made themselves theologically problematic, but practically essential. By 1434, the Medici Bank operates 16 branch offices, manages assets exceeding 200,000 florins, and generates annual profits averaging 25,000 to 30,000 florins. They have perfected the art of profitable piety, making fortunes from the church while maintaining the appearance of Christian virtue. The system is working perfectly. Then Cosimo decides it's time to buy a city. September 1433, Cosimo de' Medici is arrested by Florence's government, imprisoned in the Palazzo Vecchio, and threatened with execution. The charge is conspiracy against the state. The real crime is being too rich and too powerful. The Bicci family, Florence's traditional oligarchs, have finally recognized the threat. The Medici Bank controls so much of Florence's economy that Cosimo wields more power than the elected government. The crisis explodes because Cosimo made a calculated mistake between 1429 and 1433. He expanded Medici lending to Florentine citizens aggressively, creating a client network of merchants, artisans, and small businessmen who owed the bank money. By 1433, over 600 Florentine families have outstanding loans from the Medici, totaling more than 140,000 florins. Cosimo believes this dependency makes him untouchable. The Albizzi understand it makes him dangerous. Rinaldo degli Albizzi, the effective ruler of Florence, despite its republican constitution, convinces the Signoria, the city's governing council, that Cosimo is planning a coup. The evidence is circumstantial, but telling. Cosimo has loaned money to members of the Signoria. He's financed friends into guild leadership positions. He's used bank resources to support allies in elections. He hasn't seized power, but he's bought it. Cosimo is held in a cell in the tower of the Palazzo Vecchio for 22 days while the Albizzi faction debates execution. He faces real danger. Previous threats to Florentine oligarchy have ended in exile or death. But Cosimo has prepared for this. During his imprisonment, he doesn't protest his innocence or plead for mercy. He sends messages through his bank network, activating his real weapon, economic leverage. Here, ask what actually happens behind the scenes. Medici Bank representatives inform key Florentine merchants that if Cosimo is executed, the bank will immediately call all outstanding loans. Merchants who owe 5,000 florins will need to repay immediately or face bankruptcy. Textile producers dependent on Medici trade credit will lose access to wool supplies. The Medici managed funds for Florence's Montecommune, the public debt fund, will be withdrawn, threatening government solvency. Additionally, Cosimo's agents bribe specific members of the Signoria with promises of loan forgiveness or new credit lines if they vote for exile rather than execution. The exact amounts are never recorded, but contemporary sources mention 10,000 florins distributed to secure votes. This isn't politics. This is a hostile takeover executed from a prison cell using financial weapons. On October 3, 1433, the Signoria votes to exile Cosimo for 10 years rather than execute him, He's sent to Venice. The Albizzi celebrate victory. They've removed the threat without creating a martyr, but they've made a fatal error. They've left the Medici Bank operational and Cosimo alive. From Venice, Cosimo continues managing bank operations through letters and trusted agents. The Medici Bank doesn't just survive his absence, it expands. Cosimo cultivates relationships with Venice's government, offering preferential loans and exchange rate deals. He positions himself as a valuable asset to Venice, creating incentive for Venetian protection. Meanwhile, Florence's economy deteriorates without active Medici participation. Credit tightens. Trade finance becomes expensive. The public debt fund, dependent on Medici management, struggles. Merchants who supported the Albizzi start suffering from reduced credit access. The cost of removing Cosimo becomes visible in declining commercial activity. The Albizzi tried to fill the gap by partnering with other Florentine banks, particularly the Papacy and Strozzi families. But these institutions lack the Medici's pan-European network and PayPal connections. Latina can provide local credit, but not international letters of exchange. Latina can finance wool purchases, but not PayPal revenue transfers. Florence's position as Italy's financial center weakens. By September 1434, after just 1 year of Cosimo's exile, Florence faces mounting problems. Trade revenues are down 18%. The public debt fund is underfunded, and political instability is increasing, as various factions blame each other for economic decline. A group of pro-Medici citizens, heavily concentrated among those who owed the bank money, begins agitating for Cosimo's return. In September 1434, new elections for the Signoria produce a majority favorable to the Medici. This isn't accidental. Cosimo's agents have spent the year financing pro-Medici candidates, forgiving loans to supporters, and offering generous terms to wavering merchants. The election is bought with bank resources. The new Signoria immediately votes to recall Cosimo from exile and exile the Albizzi faction instead. On October 6, 1434, Cosimo returns to Florence in triumph. He's greeted by crowds of supporters, many of whom owe him money. He has won a political war using purely financial weapons. No army, no violence, just credit, debt, and dependency. Cosimo does something unexpected upon his return. He doesn't seize official power. He doesn't declare himself duke or claim any governmental title. He returns to his position as a private banker and continues operating the Medici Bank as before. This is strategic genius. By holding no official position, he can't be charged with tyranny. By remaining a private citizen, he maintains republican legitimacy. Everyone understands the reality. Florence's government can't function without Medici cooperation. Between 1434 and 1440, Cosimo consolidates control through what he calls accopiatori, committees that vet candidates for public office. Cosimo controls a myth, but Cosimo controls enough members to exclude anti-Medici candidates. This creates a system where Florence maintains republican forms. Elections still occur. Councils still debate, but only Medici-approved individuals hold power. The mechanism is brilliant because it's invisible. Florence isn't a dictatorship, it's a republic, where the most powerful man holds no office but controls who does. Cosimo earns the nickname Pater Patriae, Father of the Fatherland, despite never being elected to anything more than brief terms on city councils. He rules Florence for 30 years without officially ruling at all. The 1434 crisis proves the Medici formula. Financial power translates to political control without military conquest. Create enough dependency through credit, and you can buy a government. Maintain enough liquidity to credibly threaten withdrawal, and you can survive opposition. Operate through proxies and intermediaries, and you can rule without the responsibilities of visible authority. Cosimo hasn't conquered Florence. Purchased it. By 1440, Cosimo de' Medici controls Florence politically and dominates European banking financially. Now he builds the infrastructure that will define the Renaissance and cement Medici cultural supremacy for centuries. The mechanism is patronage, but the scale is unprecedented. Between 1434 and 1464, Cosimo personally spends over 660,000 florins on art, architecture, libraries, and religious institutions. This is more than double the Medici Bank's total original capitalization. The expenditure isn't altruism. It's strategic investment in reputation management and political legitimacy. Every church Cosimo builds, every monastery he endows, every manuscript he commissions serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates piety to offset banking guilt. It employs Florentine craftsmen who become dependent on Medici funding. And it creates permanent monuments associating the Medici name with cultural achievement. The Basilica di San Lorenzo becomes Cosimo's architectural flagship. Starting in 1419, he finances its complete reconstruction, spending over 40,000 florins across 30 years. He hires Filippo Brunelleschi, the architect who designed Florence's cathedral dome, to create a church that's simultaneously a house of worship and a Medici family monument. The old sacristy becomes the Medici burial chamber. The entire church is embedded with Medici heraldry and symbolism. When Florentines worship, they're surrounded by Medici patronage. But the San Lorenzo project does more than burnish reputation. It creates employment for hundreds of workers: stonemasons, carpenters, painters, sculptors, bronze workers, and laborers. These workers depend on continued Medici funding. They vote in guild elections that influence city politics. They become a constituency with direct economic interest in Medici power. Patronage creates political clients disguised as cultural achievement. Cosimo also invests heavily in manuscript collection and library construction. Between 1444 and 1464, he personally funds the copying of over 800 classical manuscripts, spending approximately 30,000 florins on scribes, illuminators, and binding. He builds the Biblioteca Medici Lorenziana, designing it to be Europe's first public library accessible to scholars, regardless of status. This isn't just culture, it's infrastructure for humanist scholarship that makes Florence the intellectual center of Italy. The library strategy has practical benefits. By concentrating rare manuscripts in Florence, Cosimo attracts scholars from across Europe. These scholars need patronage to survive, making them dependent on Medici generosity. Produce works dedicated to Medici patrons, spreading the family's cultural reputation. They tutor Medici children, ensuring the next generation receives elite humanist education. The library becomes an institution manufacturing intellectual support for Medici rule. Cosimo's patronage of specific artists creates the template for Renaissance artist-patron relationships. He establishes a relationship with Donatello that lasts 40 years, commissioning over 20 major works, including the Bronze David, the first freestanding nude statue since antiquity. The David isn't just art, it's political symbolism. A young underdog defeats a powerful enemy through skill rather than strength, precisely Cosimo's narrative about defeating the Bicci oligarchy. Fra Angelico receives Medici patronage to fresco the monastery of San Marco, which Cosimo rebuilds at a cost of 36,000 florins between 1438 and 1452. The monastery becomes a Medici showcase, demonstrating piety through architectural magnificence. But it also serves political function. The monastery hosts important diplomatic meetings, providing neutral ground for negotiations where Cosimo can exert influence without appearing to govern. The patronage network expands to include philosophers, theologians, poets, and musicians. Cosimo funds the Platonic Academy, essentially paying philosophers to translate Greek texts and debate classical wisdom. This creates an intellectual atmosphere that attracts talent to Florence, enhancing the city's prestige and commercial appeal. Rich families send sons to Florence for humanist education, bringing wealth and connections. Between 1434 and 1464, Medici patronage employs approximately 400 artists, craftsmen, scholars, and builders in Florence alone. When you include indirect employment, the construction projects, manuscript copying, and artistic commissions, the number exceeds 2,000 people whose livelihoods partially depend on Medici spending. This is a massive client network created through cultural expenditure. The financial innovation funding this patronage reveals Cosimo's accounting genius. The Medici Bank maintains separate accounts for business operations and personal patronage. Bank profits finance the patronage spending, but the patronage is categorized as Cosimo's private expenditure, not business expense. This allows him to spend freely while maintaining the bank's commercial creditworthiness. He's essentially using business profits as personal political war chest, but structuring it legally as legitimate private spending. The geographic expansion continues simultaneously. By 1450, the Medici Bank operates branches in Rome, Venice, Milan, Geneva, Bruges, London, and Avignon. The Rome branch remains the most profitable, generating 15,000 to 20,000 florins annually from PayPal banking. Cosimo has also secured the exclusive contract to manage the PayPal alamines at Toffa, a monopoly worth 100,000 florins over 10 years. Alum is essential for textile production, giving the Medici control over a critical industrial input. The political influence reaches new heights in 1439 when Cosimo hosts the Council of Florence, a diplomatic summit attempting to reunify the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches. He personally funds the event, housing 700 delegates for months at a cost exceeding 30,000 florins. The council fails to reunify Christianity, but succeeds in making Florence the center of European diplomacy and showcasing Medici magnificence to visiting prelates and princes. By 1450, the Medici Bank manages assets exceeding 350,000 florins. Cosimo's personal wealth is estimated at 240,000 florins. The family has transitioned from bankers to cultural and political leaders without holding monarchical titles. They built dependency networks through credit, patronage networks through cultural spending, and political networks through strategic generosity. They've made themselves synonymous with Florence's golden age. The spending creates a hidden problem. Cosimo is aging, approaching 60. His sons, Lorenzo and Piero, are managing increasing portions of bank operations, but they lack his financial discipline and political subtlety. The patronage spending has become expected rather than strategic, creating obligations that will burden the next generation. The infrastructure of cultural dominance is magnificent but expensive, requiring continuous bank profits to maintain. If those profits decline, the entire system becomes vulnerable. The year is 1458, and Cosimo de' Medici faces a problem that money has never solved: mortality. He's 69 years old, suffering from gout, and recognizing that his sons lack his political genius. But he has one final strategic move that will secure the Medici legacy for generations. He's going to buy the papacy itself. Not for himself, but for the Medici family's long-term power. The opportunity emerges when Pope Calixtus III dies in August 1458. The conclave to elect his successor gathers in Rome with 18 cardinals, and Cosimo immediately recognizes the financial stakes. The new pope will control PayPal banking contracts worth 100,000 florins annually, appointments to lucrative positions across Christendom, and the political alliance structure of Italy. Securing a Medici-friendly pope is worth any investment. Cosimo's strategy is brilliantly indirect. He can't bribe cardinals openly. That's simony, the buying and selling of church offices, itself a mortal sin. Instead, the Medici Bank Rome branch extends interest-free loans to specific cardinals, offers to forgive existing debts, and promises generous terms on future transactions if their preferred candidate wins. The amounts are staggering. Contemporary sources suggest 25,000 to 40,000 florins distributed through various mechanisms during the conclave. The Medici-backed candidate is Cardinal Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini, a humanist scholar who's used Medici banking services for years and owes the bank approximately 8,000 florins. On August 19, 1458, after 3 days of voting, Colomini is elected as Pope Pius II. The first thing he does is confirm the Medici Bank's exclusive contracts for PayPal banking services. The second thing he does is appoint several Medici allies to cardinal positions. The investment has paid off spectacularly, but the real genius is what Cosimo does next. Between 1458 and 1464, he systematically increases Medici financial entanglement with the papal court, making separation economically catastrophic for the church. The Rome branch expands its services to include direct lending to cardinals, managing the papal mint, financing church construction projects, and administering alumine revenues. By 1464, the papal court owes the Medici Bank over 63,000 florins in direct debt, with annual transactions totaling more than 180,000 florins. This creates mutual dependency. The Medici need PayPal business to maintain profitability, but the papacy needs Medici credit to function. The relationship is symbiotic, but unequal. The Medici can survive without the Pope by shifting to secular lending. The Pope cannot easily replace the Medici's pan-European network and accumulated expertise. Cosimo has made the family indispensable to God's banker. The moral dimensions are extraordinary. Cosimo is simultaneously the Pope's largest creditor and a devout Catholic who funds religious institutions across Italy. He profits from lending to the church while publicly championing church authority. He disguises interest as fees while endowing monasteries with ostentatious generosity. The contradiction is visible to everyone, but acknowledged by no one. In 1461, Cosimo makes his boldest move yet. He offers to finance Pope Pius II's planned crusade against the Ottoman Empire. The Pope wants to retake Constantinople, requires funding for ships and soldiers, and has no treasury. Cosimo agrees to underwrite the crusade through Medici Bank loans totaling 60,000 florins, with repayment to come from special indulgence sales across Europe. The crusade never happens because Pius II dies in 1464 before launching it, but the offer serves its purpose. Cosimo has demonstrated that the Medici can finance even holy wars, cementing the family's position as essential to PayPal ambitions. The fact that the financing mechanism involves charging fees on money meant for crusades does and to prevent Cosimo from being celebrated as a defender of Christendom. Cosimo himself dies on August 1st, 1464, at age 75. His funeral is the grandest Florence has ever seen. It's funded by the Medici Bank at a cost exceeding 6,000 florins. He's buried in San Lorenzo, the church he rebuilt, in a tomb deliberately placed before the high altar so that every mass celebrates his memory. The Florentine government posthumously grants him the title Pater Patri, Father of the Fatherland, the only private citizen ever so honored. He never held high office, but ruled Florence for 30 years through financial power alone. His legacy is staggering: a banking network worth over 400,000 florins, political control of Florence, cultural dominance through patronage, and the papal court dependent on Medici credit. But he also leaves problems. The bank's profitability is declining as branch managers make risky loans. Cosimo's sons, Piero and Giovanni, lack his discipline. The patronage commitments require 30,000 florins annually just to maintain. The political control depends on continued economic dominance, but competitors are emerging. Most importantly, Cosimo has set a precedent his descendants will struggle to match. He bought influence with strategic investments. His grandson Lorenzo will try to maintain power through similar spending, but without equivalent banking profits. The model works brilliantly when revenue exceeds expenditure. It fails catastrophically when the math reverses. But in 1464, the Medici appear invincible. They've purchased political power in Florence, cultural supremacy through patronage, and the Pope's dependency through banking. They've proven that money properly deployed can buy anything, including spiritual authority. They've built the closest thing to an invisible empire Renaissance Italy has ever seen. And they've done it all while maintaining the fiction of republican government and Christian piety. The brilliance is complete. The decline is just beginning. Lorenzo de' Medici assumes control of the Medici Bank in Florence, de facto government, in 1469 at age 20. He inherits assets worth 235,000 florins, political dominance over Florence, and the reputation built by his grandfather, Cosimo. Within 23 years, he will squander much of the fortune, nearly destroy the bank, and yet become the most celebrated Medici in history. He accomplishes this through perhaps the greatest reputational arbitrage ever executed. He trades financial reality for cultural mythology. The numbers reveal the problem immediately. When Lorenzo takes control, the Medici Bank operates 16 branches, generating annual profits averaging 18,000 to 22,000 florins. But Lorenzo's patronage spending exceeds 40,000 florins annually. The math is unsustainable. He's spending double what the bank earns, burning through accumulated capital that Cosimo built over 40 years. Lorenzo's patronage makes Cosimo's look restrained. Between 1469 and 1492, Lorenzo spends over 680,000 florins on art, architecture, festivals, diplomatic gifts, and political bribes. This includes funding for Botticelli, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and dozens of lesser artists. He maintains the Platonic Academy at a cost of 2,000 florins annually. He hosts diplomatic events spending 8,000 to 12,000 florins per occasion. He gives personal loans to Florentine citizens, totaling over 90,000 florins, much of which is never repaid. But the spending works as political theater. Lorenzo cultivates an image as the Renaissance ideal: philosopher, prince, poet, diplomat, patron of genius, defender of Florence. He writes sonnets, hosts intellectual salons, and positions himself as the embodiment of humanist culture. The reality is darker. He's looting the bank to maintain political power and personal reputation. The banking operations deteriorate under Lorenzo's management. He appoints incompetent relatives to manage key branches. Bruges branch loses 70,000 florins between 1470 and 1480 on bad loans to Burgundian nobility who default. The London branch extends too much credit to Edward IV of England, who repudiates £10,000 of debt in 1478. The Milan branch invests in risky commercial ventures that failed spectacularly. By 1478, the Medici Bank's total assets have declined to 180,000 florins, a 23% loss in 9 years. Profits have collapsed to barely 8,000 florins annually. Lorenzo is covering shortfalls by raiding deposits, using bank assets as personal funds, and increasingly mixing Medici family finances with bank accounts. This is embezzlement by the owner, but it's also suicidal for the institution. The crisis explodes on April 26, 1478. The Papacy family, rival Florentine bankers backed by Pope Sixtus IV, attempt to assassinate Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano during Easter Mass in Florence Cathedral. Giuliano is stabbed 19 times and dies. Lorenzo survives with minor wounds. The conspiracy fails to kill Lorenzo, but succeeds in exposing his vulnerabilities. He has enemies powerful enough to attempt murder, and the Pope himself approved the plot. The Papacy conspiracy reveals the cost of Lorenzo's financial recklessness. The Papacy gained papal support partly because Lorenzo's declining bank was losing its monopoly on papal finance. Sixtus IV, elected in 1471, resents Lorenzo's political interference and sees the Papacy as alternative bankers. By weakening the Medici Bank's profitability, Lorenzo has weakened his political protection. Lorenzo's response to the assassination attempt is brutal and brilliant. He has the conspirators hunted down and executed with spectacular violence. 80 people are hanged, including the Archbishop of Pisa, who participated in the plot. Their bodies are left hanging from the Palazzo Vecchio for weeks as warning. Lorenzo is demonstrating that attacking him means death, but he's also revealing his tyrannical nature beneath the humanist facade. The Papacy War that follows between 1478 in 1480 costs Florence over 350,000 florins and devastates the Medici Bank as remaining profitability. Pope Sixtus IV excommunicates Lorenzo and places Florence under interdict, forbidding religious services. This threatens Florence's commercial relationships and Lorenzo's political position. Lorenzo makes a desperate gamble. He travels personally to Naples in December 1479 to negotiate peace with King Florentine, Florence's enemy. The Naples negotiation demonstrates Lorenzo's actual genius. He can't offer military strength. Florence's army is weak. He can't offer money. The Medici Bank is depleted. Instead, he offers himself as hostage and argues that a strong Florence serves Naples' interests against Papal and Venetian expansion. He's selling political logic and personal charisma. Miraculously, it works. Florentine agrees to peace in March 1480. Lorenzo returns to Florence, a hero, but the victory is Pyrrhic. The Medici Bank has lost its Papal banking contracts, costing 15,000 florins annually in lost profits. The war has consumed reserves. The bank's assets are now approximately 110,000 florins, less than half of what Lorenzo inherited. Several branches closed permanently: Bruges in 1480, London in 1478, Avignon in 1476. The empire is contracting rapidly. Lorenzo compensates by increasing political control of Florence. Between 1480 and 1490, he systematically eliminates republican forms, concentrating power in a Council of 70 that he controls absolutely. Florence is still called a republic, but Lorenzo is effectively duke in all but name. He arranges his daughter's marriage to the Pope's son in 1487, restoring Medici papal connections. He positions his second son Giovanni for a church career, investing 80,000 florins in bribes and influence to secure Giovanni's appointment as cardinal at age 13 in 1489. The cardinal appointment is Lorenzo's masterstroke. Giovanni de' Medici. Later, Pope Leo X will restore Medici fortunes decades after Lorenzo's death. But in 1489, it's another massive expenditure that the failing bank can barely afford. Lorenzo is mortgaging the present for potential future returns, gambling that a Medici pope will justify the investment. Culturally, Lorenzo's reign is Florence's golden age. The artists he patronizes create works that define the Renaissance. Botticelli's Birth of Venus, Michelangelo's early sculptures, Leonardo's innovations. Lorenzo's court attracts intellectuals from across Europe. His poetry is celebrated. His diplomatic skill maintains Italian peace through the League of Lodi. His reputation as Lorenzo the Magnificent is earned through genuine achievements, but the financial reality is catastrophic. By 1492, the Medici Bank's assets are approximately 70,000 florins, down from 235,000 when Lorenzo took control. Annual profits are negligible. Several branches operate at losses. The bank survives primarily on Lorenzo's political power in Florence, which allows him to divert public funds and manipulate contracts. Lorenzo dies on April 8, 1492, at age 43 from chronic illness, possibly hereditary gout. His death triggers immediate crisis. His son Piero inherits a depleted bank, enemies who waited for Lorenzo's death to strike, and a reputation impossible to maintain. Within 2 years, the Medici will be expelled from Florence. Within a generation, the bank will collapse entirely. But Lorenzo's legend will endure, the magnificent prince who embodied Renaissance culture while quietly destroying the financial empire that made it possible. November 9, 1494. A French army of 30,000 soldiers under King Charles VIII marches toward Florence. Giovanni de' Medici, Lorenzo's son and Florence's ruler for just 2 years, rides out to negotiate. He returns, having surrendered key Florentine fortresses without consulting the government. The city explodes in rage. After 60 years of Medici dominance, the dynasty is expelled in 3 days through violence, looting, and mob fury. The expulsion reveals what Lorenzo's cultural magnificence disguised. The Medici Bank is bankrupt. The family's political power depends entirely on bank resources, and Florence's citizens have been subsidizing Medici glory through manipulated public finances. The reckoning destroys both the bank and the political empire simultaneously. Here's what actually collapsed the structure between 1492 and 1494. Piero faces obligations the depleted bank cannot meet. The Rome branch, already struggling under Lorenzo, loses its remaining PayPal contracts when Pope Alexander VI appoints the Chigi family as his bankers in 1493. This eliminates 8,000 florins in annual profit. The Venice and Florence branches are insolvent, kept operating only through Lorenzo's political manipulation of public funds. Piero, lacking his father's political subtlety or his great-grandfather's financial discipline, makes catastrophic decisions. He borrows 65,000 florins from Florence's public treasury, essentially looting taxpayer money to cover bank losses. He extends massive personal loans to his friends, totaling over 40,000 florins that are never repaid. He invests in speculative mining ventures that fail. 1494. The Medici Bank's assets are approximately 38,000 florins against liabilities exceeding 90,000 florins. The institution is technically bankrupt. When Charles VIII invades Italy, claiming Naples as French territory, Piero panics. He surrenders Pisa and other fortresses to avoid battle, believing Florence cannot afford war. But he's miscalculated completely. Florentines discover that their public funds have been drained to support the failing Medici Bank. They learn that decades of Medici generosity was financed through accounting tricks, diverted public revenue, and unsustainable debt. Rage is volcanic. On November 9, 1494, crowds storm Medici properties. A Tazo Medici is looted. Art collections accumulated over 60 years are stolen or destroyed. Financial records are burned. Piero flees the city with his brothers. Medici Bank's branches across Europe, lacking central coordination and capital, collapse within months. Depositors lose savings. Creditors receive pennies on the florin. The greatest banking dynasty in Renaissance Europe is destroyed. The Florence branch closes in December 1494, owing depositors 47,000 florins it cannot pay. The Rome branch shuts down in 1495 after the Pope seizes remaining assets to satisfy Medici debts to the PayPal treasury. The Venice branch is liquidated in 1496, selling its building to cover obligations. The Lion branch, the last surviving operation, closes in 1503 when its manager dies, leaving unsettled accounts totaling 19,000 florins. The human cost is devastating, but mostly invisible. Hundreds of families lose life savings deposited with the Medici Bank. Merchants who relied on Medici credit go bankrupt. Artists and scholars who depended on Medici patronage lose income. Workers employed on Medici-funded construction projects face unemployment. The economic ripple effects harm thousands. But Florence itself survives and even prospers briefly. The Republic is restored under Savonarola, Dominican friar who preaches against Medici corruption and advocates Christian austerity. Ironically, Savonarola's critique of Medici banking as usurious is theologically correct. They did charge interest disguised as fees. They did profit from financial manipulation, and they did enrich themselves while claiming Christian virtue. The Medici family scatters. Piero dies in 1503, drowning during a military campaign. His brother Giovanni, the Cardinal Lorenzo, invested so heavily in creating, survives by remaining in Rome under PayPal protection. Lorenzo di Pier Francesco de' Medici, from a cadet branch, remains in Florence by publicly denouncing Piero. The family name is politically toxic. The bank's collapse also destroys the PayPal banking system the Medici built. Without Medici infrastructure, the papacy struggles to collect revenue from distant territories. Successive popes try replacing the Medici with other bankers, the Chigi, the Fuggers, but none match the Medici's pan-European coordination. The system fractures into regional banking operations that are less efficient and more expensive. What survives is the technical innovations. Double-entry bookkeeping becomes standard across Europe. Bills of exchange remain the primary mechanism for international money transfer. The partnership structure limiting liability is adopted by emerging merchant companies. The Medici invented modern banking practices even as their own bank failed. The political lesson is equally clear. Financial power without military force is unstable during chaos. The Medici controlled Florence for 60 years through dependency relationships, cultural patronage, and economic leverage. But when foreign invasion threatened, their soft power evaporated instantly. They had no army, no fortress, and no popular loyalty beyond what money could buy. When the money was gone, the loyalty disappeared. Yet, this is not the end of the Medici story. Giovanni de' Medici, Lorenzo's cardinal son, is only 19 in 1494. He will become Pope Leo X in 1513, restoring Medici power through ecclesiastical rather than financial authority. The family will return to Florence, eventually becoming hereditary Grand Dukes of Tuscany, but they will never again be bankers. The empire, built on disguised usury and PayPal dependency, is permanently destroyed. The 1494 collapse proves that even the most sophisticated financial system cannot survive insolvency. Medici built dependency networks, cultural monuments, and political structures that seemed permanent. But when the underlying bank became insolvent, everything built upon it collapsed within months. No amount of cultural prestige or political manipulation could compensate for mathematical bankruptcy. The bills came due, and the Medici couldn't pay. The Medici Bank is dead by 1505, but its DNA lives in every financial institution that followed. The mechanisms they invented to disguise usury became the standard practices of modern banking. The holding company structure they pioneered is now universal corporate architecture. The bills of exchange they perfected evolved into letters of credit, wire transfers, and eventually digital currency transactions. They failed as a family business, but succeeded in creating the invisible infrastructure of capitalism. The usury disguise techniques deserve particular attention because they're still operational today. When the Medici charged 5% for a 90-day bill of exchange, they called it an exchange rate fee. Modern banks charge overdraft fees, service charges, transaction costs that effectively function as interest but avoid usury stigma. When the Medici created partnership structures to share profits rather than charge interest, they pioneered equity investment. Modern venture capital, private equity, and investment banking all use the same logic. We're not lenders charging interest, we're partners sharing returns. The separation of bank operations into semi-independent branches, each its own partnership with limited liability, became the model for modern corporate subsidiaries. When J.P. Morgan operates separate legal entities in different countries, when Goldman Sachs structures deals through multiple subsidiary companies, they're using the Medici organizational blueprint from 1420. The goal is identical: limit risk exposure, operate across jurisdictions, and maintain coordination while avoiding consolidated liability. Double-entry bookkeeping, which the Medici didn't invent but perfected and systematized, is now the mandatory accounting standard worldwide. Every corporation, government, and nonprofit uses the debit credit system to track transactions. The Libro Segreto, the Medici's secret ledger, showing actual profits separate from public accounts, has its modern equivalent in the difference between internal management, accounting, and public financial statements. Companies report what regulations require while managing based on private metrics. The PayPal banking model the Medici created, where a private institution manages public finances and takes fees on every transaction, became the template for central banking. The Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, they all operate on the principle of private or semi-private institutions managing government debt and monetary policy while claiming independence from direct political control. The Medici proved this model works. Governments need financial expertise and network access that only specialized institutions provide. But the Medici also revealed the fatal flaw in financial empire building. Concentration in single asset classes or client relationships creates existential vulnerability. When the Medici became over-dependent on PayPal business, they gave the Pope veto power over their survival. When Lorenzo concentrated spending on political patronage rather than diversified investment, he made the bank hostage to Florentine politics. Modern financial institutions make identical mistakes. The 2008 crisis resulted partly from banks over-concentrating in mortgage-backed securities. The cultural patronage model survived and evolved. Medici proved that supporting artists, intellectuals, and cultural institutions generates reputation value exceeding the investment cost. Modern equivalents are everywhere. Tech billionaires funding research institutes, hedge fund managers endowing university buildings, corporations sponsoring museums. The motivation is identical to Lorenzo's. Transform money into reputation, reputation into influence, influence into protection from criticism. The marriage of finance and political power the Medici perfected is now standard operating procedure. Modern investment banks advise governments, manage sovereign debt, and employ former government officials. The revolving door between Treasury departments and Wall Street banks is the contemporary version of Cosimo managing Florence while officially being a private banker. The form has changed, but the substance persists. Those who control credit influence policy. Even the Medici's failure teaches a lesson that modern finance ignores repeatedly. Unsustainable spending destroys empires regardless of cultural achievement. Lorenzo created the Renaissance's golden age while bankrupting the bank that financed it. Modern governments run deficits to fund programs that generate political support while undermining long-term fiscal stability. Corporations prioritize quarterly earnings to satisfy investors while neglecting strategic investment. The Medici pattern repeats constantly. The conspiracy of silence around usury has its modern equivalent in the euphemisms surrounding financial extraction. Payday lenders don't charge usurious interest, they charge fees. Credit card companies don't exploit the poor, they provide liquidity. Private equity firms don't strip assets, they optimize capital structure. The language changes, but the mechanism persists. Sophisticated actors profit from those with fewer options while using technical terminology to obscure exploitation. The Medici also proved something important about institutional memory and mythology. The family's banking empire collapsed 500 years ago, but Medici still signifies cultural sophistication and financial power. The mythology outlasted the reality because Lorenzo invested in art and architecture. It survived while the bank's ledgers rotted. Modern companies understand this. Tesla's brand value exceeds its manufacturing capacity because Elon Musk invests in myth-making. The Medici would recognize this immediately. What the Medici never solved, and what modern finance still struggles with. Key is the fundamental contradiction between profit maximization and social benefit. The Medici enriched themselves through financial mechanisms that transferred wealth from productive activities to financial intermediation. They added transaction costs to commerce while claiming to facilitate it. Modern finance does exactly the same. High-frequency trading adds no productive value, but extracts billions in profits. The Medici pioneered the art of making money from money while contributing minimal actual value. The most disturbing Medici legacy is the normalization of public-private financial entanglement. When Cosimo looted Florence's public finances to support his bank and called it governance, he established a template that persists. Governments bail out banks deemed too big to fail. Central banks buy corporate debt to stabilize markets. Public resources are deployed to protect private profits while claiming systemic necessity. The Medici made this model respectable 600 years ago. March 11, 1513, Giovanni de' Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent's second son, is elected Pope Leo X at age 37. The Medici have achieved the ultimate prize, one of their own rules, the Catholic Church. This is the delayed return on Lorenzo's 80,000 florin investment in bribes and influence to make Giovanni a cardinal at age 13. The banking empire is dead, but the Medici have successfully converted financial power into ecclesiastical authority. They've transcended money by buying the institution that claims authority over money itself. Leo X's papacy reveals both the genius of the Medici long-term strategy and the corruption at Christianity's heart. Giovanni was groomed from childhood for church career precisely because Lorenzo recognized that papal authority was the one power position that could be destroyed by bankruptcy. Banks collapse, republics can expel you, but a pope serves for life and controls resources beyond any single institution. The numbers surrounding Leo X's papal finances are staggering and prove he learned nothing from the banking collapse. He inherits a papal treasury with 400,000 ducats in reserve left by his predecessor, Julius II. Within 8 years, he spends all of it, plus accumulates 400,000 ducats in debt. Cat's famous quote captures his philosophy: "God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." Leo X's spending makes Lorenzo look frugal. He maintains a personal household of over 600 servants and hangers-on. His hunting parties cost 8,000 ducats each. He hosts theatrical performances costing 3,000 to 5,000 ducats per event. He gives gifts to artists and poets totaling over 100,000 ducats during his papacy. He's operating the papal court like a Renaissance festival financed by Christendom's tides. But Leo also completes the Medici pattern. He restores family political power in Florence by installing his nephew Lorenzo as duke in 1513. This requires military intervention, costing the papal treasury 150,000 ducats, but it reestablishes Medici control of Florence after 18 years of exile. He's using papal resources to resurrect the family's secular power. The circle is complete. The bank-financed papal dependency. Papal gratitude created the cardinal. The cardinal became pope. The pope restores the family's political position. The theological corruption is breathtaking. Leo X needs money to fund both his lifestyle and the construction of St. Peter's Basilica. In 1517, he authorizes the sale of indulgences across Germany, essentially monetizing salvation. The Pope is literally selling forgiveness of sins for cash, using banking techniques the Medici pioneered. Dominican friar Johann Tetzel famously preaches, "As soon as a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs." This indulgence sale triggers Martin Luther's Reformation. On October 31st, 1517, Luther posts his 95 Theses condemning the commercialization of salvation. The Medici Pope's financial desperation inadvertently splits Christianity. Leo X excommunicates Luther in 1521, but the Protestant Reformation spreads unstoppably. The Medici strategy of monetizing church authority destroys the universal church they claimed to serve. Leo's financial mismanagement is systematic. He creates 31 new cardinal positions between 1513 and 1521, selling each appointment for 20,000 to 30,000 ducats, raising approximately 750,000 ducats total. This is simony, the buying and selling of church offices, technically a mortal sin, but practically the PayPal revenue model. He's applying Medici banking logic. If you control the institution, you can sell access to its privileges. The PayPal finances under Leo X reveal the ultimate corruption of the Medici model. The family that built wealth through disguised usury now controls the institution that condemned usury, and are using that control to extract wealth more aggressively than any banker dared. They've become the thing they pretended not to be while building their empire. Leo X dies in December 1521, leaving the PayPal treasury 400,000 ducats in debt and Christianity permanently fractured. His pontificate is culturally magnificent. He patronizes Raphael and Michelangelo, but financially disastrous and theologically catastrophic. He proves that the Medici could buy the papacy, but couldn't competently manage it. Yet the family survives and eventually prospers. Another Medici, Julio, becomes Pope Clement VII in 1523. The family rules Florence as hereditary Grand Dukes from 1569 to 1737. They transitioned from banking to aristocracy, from financial power to hereditary nobility. The transformation is complete. The family that started as forbidden moneylenders ends as legitimate princes and popes. The irony is total. The Medici banking empire, built on violating church teachings about usury, ultimately made the family so wealthy they could buy church leadership itself. They used the profits from disguised interest to purchase the institution that condemned interest. They leveraged financial power into spiritual authority. And they proved that in the economy of power, money converts into legitimacy if you spend enough of it strategically. Dex Papacy demonstrates the endpoint of the Medici trajectory. They didn't want to be bankers. They wanted to be nobility. Banking was the vehicle, not the destination. Once they accumulated sufficient wealth, they transitioned to cultural patronage and political power. The banking empire's collapse in 1494 was painful, but not fatal, because the family had already diversified to reputation and relationships. The final Medici lesson from Leo X's papacy is that institutional capture is more durable than institutional creation. The Medici Bank collapsed, but the Medici family survived by capturing the papacy and the Florentine state. Modern equivalents are everywhere. Individuals who build companies, sell them, then use the proceeds to capture regulatory agencies or political positions. The Medici proved the pattern works. Build wealth through innovation. Convert wealth to influence. Use influence to capture institutions. Use institutional authority to perpetuate family power. The year is 2025, and the Medici Bank has been dead for 520 years. But walk into any modern investment bank, examine any sovereign debt crisis, study any public-private financial partnership, and you're seeing Medici innovations. They failed as a business, but succeeded in writing the source code of modern finance. Start with government bonds, the core mechanism of modern sovereign debt. When countries issue bonds to finance budgets, they're using the Medici model, selling debt at discount, distributing it through intermediaries, creating secondary markets, and paying interest disguised as return on investment. The U.S. Treasury market, worth over $26 trillion, operates on principles the Medici established in 1420. Governments need cash immediately. Investors want safe returns. Intermediaries profit from facilitating the exchange. Investment banks like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and J.P. Morgan are direct Medici descendants. They underwrite government and corporate bonds, taking fees for distribution. They operate international networks coordinating capital flows. They maintain separate legal entities in different jurisdictions to limit liability. They employ former government officials to maintain political access. They profit from information asymmetry and network advantages. The Medici invented this business model 600 years ago. The Vatican Bank, formerly the Institute for the Works of Religion, still exists and still operates using Medici principles. Keene manages PayPal finances, transfers money internationally, and maintains secrecy around transactions. It's repeatedly been caught in scandals involving money laundering and financial impropriety. The Medici would recognize it immediately as their creation. An institution where religious authority and financial power merge while maintaining plausible deniability about extraction. Private equity firms use the Medici partnership model almost exactly. When Blackstone or KKR invest in companies, they're not lending at interest. They're taking partnership positions, expecting profit participation. When they restructure companies to maximize returns, they're using the same logic the Medici applied. Invest in ventures, extract maximum value through financial engineering, distribute profits to partners. The legal structure is Medici. The scale is modern. Tax havens operate on the Medici principle of jurisdictional arbitrage. The Medici exploited inconsistencies between Italian city-state laws, church canon law, and secular regulations. Modern corporations exploit differences between national tax codes, establishing subsidiaries in low-tax jurisdictions while operating in high-tax markets. Ireland, the Cayman Islands, and Luxembourg function for Apple and Google exactly as different. Medici branch locations functioned for Cosimo, legal structures to minimize obligations while maximizing profits. Cultural patronage remains a tool for converting financial wealth into social legitimacy. The Getty Museum, the Rockefeller Foundation, Gates Foundation. They all executing Lorenzo's strategy. Spend money on culturally prestigious projects that generate reputation value exceeding the cash outlay. Tech billionaires fund university buildings, name hospitals, and endow libraries. The goal is identical to Medici patronage, transformed criticized wealth into celebrated beneficence. The revolving door between government and finance, where Treasury secretaries come from Goldman Sachs and Federal Reserve governors retired to hedge funds. It's the modern version of Cosimo running Florence while officially being a private banker. The Medici proved that the line between public and private finance is fiction maintained for appearances. Modern finance-government integration just makes it more obvious. Deed-based political control has become explicit national policy. The IMF and World Bank impose structural adjustment programs on debtor nations, requiring specific economic policies as loan conditions. China's Belt and Road Initiative uses infrastructure loans to gain leverage over developing countries. This is precisely the Medici model. Create dependency through debt. Use dependency to influence policy. Maintain the fiction that it's voluntary partnership. Even the Medici's failure teaches lessons modern finance refuses to learn. Overconcentration in specific asset classes, inadequate diversification. Using leverage to maintain unsustainable lifestyles. All these mistakes that destroyed the Medici Bank are repeated constantly. The 2008 financial crisis resulted from banks over-leveraging in mortgage-backed securities. The current sovereign debt crisis in multiple countries reflects unsustainable spending financed through bond issuance. The Medici pattern of eventual collapse through overextension continues. The euphemistic language concealing extraction also persists. The Medici called interest exchange rate differences. Modern finance calls debt servicing debt sustainability, predatory lending, alternative financial services, and wealth extraction value creation. The terminology evolves, but the function remains. Disguise unpopular practices with technical jargon that obscures moral content. The moral questions the Medici raised remain unresolved. Is it acceptable to profit from dependency? Should financial institutions that serve public functions be privately owned? Can the pursuit of profit be reconciled with social benefit, or is the conflict inherent? Next, the Medici answered yes to the first question, profited enormously, then collapsed. Modern finance answers yes to all three, profits spectacularly, periodically, requires taxpayer bailouts when the model fails. The contemporary warning is clear. The Medici built an empire on disguised usury, political capture, and cultural reputation laundering. The empire collapsed when revenues couldn't sustain expenditures, but the techniques they invented became permanent features of capitalism. We're not free of the Medici. We're living inside the system they created and calling it normal. What choice before modern society is the same one Florence faced in 1494, except that financial power concentrates in institutions that operate beyond democratic accountability. Restructure the system to serve broader social purposes. Florence expelled the Medici, but couldn't expel the financial architecture they built. We face the same limitation. We can regulate banks, but we can't escape the logic of credit, debt, and financial intermediation that the Medici pioneered. The Medici proved that money, skillfully deployed, conquers everything except mathematics. They bought popes, cities, artists, and centuries of reputation. But they couldn't buy solvency when expenses exceeded income. They created tools of financial power that outlasted their empire, and they demonstrated that the institutions built on profit extraction will always call themselves servants of the public good, while serving themselves first. The ghost of the Medici isn't a conspiracy. It's the architecture of modern finance itself, built on foundations they laid, operating on principles they established, using tools they invented. We live in the Medici world. Just don't call it that anymore.